Imagine paying 1.5 crore rupees, not for a single prime acre of farmland in Haryana, but for a 99-year lease on 65 acres of ultra-fertile land all the way in Tanzania.
Right. It's wild.
Today, we're exploring how Indian farmers are quietly outsourcing agriculture to Africa and, well, how that bold move connects to an impending crisis over the water you drink, the tumbling value of the rupee, and even, get this, microchips being embedded in human brains.
Yeah, it really is a phenomenal web of events. And, if you're studying for the UPSC, or if you simply want to understand the undercurrents shaping our reality today, just memorizing isolated headlines isn't going to cut it.
Exactly.
You really have to understand the mechanics underneath.
Which is exactly why we're here. Welcome to a special edition of our Deep Dive. Consider us your personal current affairs mentors. We have a massive stack of 20 crucial updates from today's sources, dated April 30th, 2026.
A lot to get through.
So much. But instead of just giving you a table of contents, we're going to synthesize these updates into 4 key pillars of governance. We'll look at polity and law, the economic engine, the global chessboard, and future frontiers.
Sounds like a solid blueprint.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with our first pillar, the foundation of it all, how the state defines our rights, our bodies, and our families. The Ministry of Home Affairs just notified the Citizenship Amendment rules for 2026.
Right, and the defining feature of these new rules is the shift to a completely digital framework using electronic OCI, or EOCI, cards.
Okay.
The state is essentially streamlining how it tracks the diaspora. But within that framework, there is a very strict zero-tolerance proviso regarding minors.
Wait, what kind of proviso?
Well, if a minor holds an Indian passport, they absolutely cannot simultaneously possess the passport of another country.
Oh, wow. It's a fascinating hard line. I mean, even though overseas citizenship of India isn't technically full citizenship, the government is closing any loopholes for dual passport misuse early on.
Yeah, they are clearly defining the boundaries of state identity.
But, we're also seeing the courts draw boundaries around something far more intimate, which is bodily autonomy.
Yes, the MTP Act case.
Exactly. The Supreme Court just handed down a massive ruling on the Medical Termination of Pregnancy Act concerning a 15-year-old rape survivor.
And this was an incredibly tense legal and, ethical collision. The minor was 30 weeks pregnant.
Right.
And the All India Institute of Medical Sciences, acting as the nodal medical body, filed a curative petition to actually stop the abortion. Their argument was that terminating a pregnancy at 30 weeks is, in their exact words, akin to feticide.
And they didn't just argue it on philosophy, right? I mean, they brought empirical data to the court.
They did, yeah. They cited a real-world precedent from 2025 where a child was born alive at 23 weeks under similar circumstances.
Wow, 23 weeks.
Yeah, and Ames presented the stark reality of that case. The child, who is now a year old, has extremely low birth weight, requires continuous mechanical ventilation through a tracheostomy, and suffers from severe, permanent neurodevelopmental complications.
That is heartbreaking.
It is. So the medical institution's perspective was basically to wait 4 more weeks to ensure a safer full-term delivery.
But the Supreme Court took a completely different lens on this. Chief Justice Surya Kant prioritized the trauma of the 15-year-old minor.
Right.
He pointed out that this is a child who should be in a classroom, not being forced into motherhood against her will. The court ruled that the institution's role is to enable the parent's choice, not to make the choice for them.
Exactly. And Justice Bagchi delivered a really striking warning during the proceedings. Really because they possess specialized knowledge.
It's the idea that the hospital is the compass, not the steering wheel.
That's a great way to put it.
Right. I mean, they provide the necessary medical direction, the data, the potential outcomes, but ultimately the citizen, or in this case, the minor's legal guardians, has to drive the decision. The Chief Justice even floated the idea of amending the MTP Act to completely remove the 24-week upper limit for minors who are victims of rape.
Which is huge. And, that tension between medical definitions and legal definitions actually extends to the end of life as well.
Oh, the brain death certification.
Yes. The Supreme Court is currently demanding expert opinions on how brain death is officially certified under the guidelines of NATO, the National Organ and Tissue Transplant Organization.
Let me guess, this is about standardizing the exact tests used.
Precisely. They are evaluating whether specific, highly technical tests like EEGs, which measure the electrical activity of the brain, and angiograms, should be made strictly mandatory to officially declare a patient brain dead.
Because right now there's ambiguity.
Right now, yes, there is ambiguity.
And that ambiguity has a massive human cost. Let's just look at the numbers for a second. India sees roughly 1.5 lakh traumatic brain injury deaths every single year.
It's a staggering number.
But out of all those tragedies, we only see about 1,100 deceased organ donations.
Wow.
Yeah, so people need absolute, undeniable trust in the medical and legal mechanism of declaring death before they consent to organ donation. If mandating an EEG builds that trust, I mean, it could literally save thousands of lives waiting on transplant lists.
Yeah, trust in the legal framework really is the bedrock of society. And we see that exact same need for clear legal boundaries in family law.
Right, the child custody case.
Right. The Allahabad High Court recently had to intervene and quash a single-bench order regarding child custody. A father had essentially handed over de facto custody of his 2 young children to his married sister.
Just like transferring a piece of property.
Yes. And the lower court actually upheld it, stating a father had the right to transfer custody to, quote, any person.
That's wild.
But the division bench struck that down immediately. They ruled that treating children as transferable assets goes against all fundamental canons of law and morality.
It just shows that the state will step in when a vulnerable person, whether that's a minor needing an abortion, a brain-dead patient, or a child in a custody dispute, cannot advocate for themselves.
Exactly.
But if we pivot to how the law handles public figures, there's a major precedent that just dropped regarding hate speech. And if you're taking notes for the UPSC, you definitely want to circle this one.
For sure. The Supreme Court cleared BJP leaders Anurag Thakur and Parvesh Verma regarding alleged hate speeches made during the 2020 Delhi protests. So we need to be clear. The political headline isn't the takeaway here.
Right. We're looking at the mechanics.
Exactly. We remain completely impartial in the politics.
Yeah.
The real takeaway is the procedural mechanism established under Section 156 of the CrPC.
Okay, let's break down that mechanism. The petitioners had gone to a magistrate asking the police to register an FIR. The lower courts dismissed it, arguing that to prosecute a public servant, you need prior sanction from a competent authority. Basically, getting permission from the government before you can investigate a government official.
But the Supreme Court clarified the timeline of the law. They ruled that prior sanction is only required at the stage when the magistrate takes cognizance of the offense, meaning when the magistrate officially applies their judicial mind to proceed with a trial.
Okay, so later in the process.
Yes. But at the precognizant stage, the stage of simply registering an FIR to begin an investigation, no sanction is needed. If the complaint discloses a cognizable offense, the police have a mandatory duty to register it.
That is a huge distinction. It essentially prevents public servants from using the prior sanction rule as a shield to stop an investigation before it even starts. It's a brilliant evolution of legal accountability.
It really is.
But, sometimes to understand how these rights evolve, we have to look backward.
Which takes us to the foundational work of B.R. Ambedkar. He's universally recognized as the architect of our Constitution, obviously. But his work between 1942 and 1946 as the labor member in the Viceroy's Executive Council is what actually built modern Indian labor rights.
Yeah, we take things like the 8-hour workday for granted, but he secured that.
He did.
He championed maternity benefits decades before they were globally standardized. He instituted the 1942 Tripartite Labor Conference, which forced the government, private employers, and labor unions to sit at the exact same table to negotiate as equals.
It was a revolutionary mechanism for its time, creating a structural balance of power in an industrializing economy.
But let me push back on this a bit.
Sure.
If Ambedkar secured 8-hour workdays and the tripartite mechanism before India even won independence, look at where we are today with the gig economy. A delivery driver or an app-based cab driver isn't working 8 hours, right? They're working 14 hours just to beat an algorithm. It feels like we've almost regressed.
Well, that is the defining policy friction of our era. The laws drafted in the 1940s were meant for factory floors, where you could clearly define the employer and the employee.
Right.
Today, the employer is a piece of software, and the worker is an independent contractor. So the challenge for current policymakers is figuring out how to inject the spirit of Ambedkar's 1942 conference into a decentralized algorithmic workforce.
And those modern workers are facing unprecedented challenges, which brings us to our second pillar, the economic engine and infrastructure, starting with the macro data, which presents a massive, counterintuitive paradox today.
The economic indicators are definitely sending mixed signals. Between April and February of the 2026 fiscal year, India saw an incredible surge in foreign direct investment, crossing $88 billion.
That sounds fantastic on paper, huge global confidence. But at the exact same time, the rupee just breached the 95 mark, hitting an all-time low of 95.34 against the US dollar.
Yeah, it's concerning.
How on earth do we have record-breaking foreign investment pouring in while our currency's value falls off a cliff?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you have to look at the global energy market. Brent crude oil has surged to $126 a barrel.
Ouch.
Yeah, and India imports the vast majority of its oil. When the price of oil spikes, Indian importers need billions of extra dollars to pay those bills. They sell rupees to buy those dollars. That massive sudden sell-off of the rupee inherently tanks its value, completely overwhelming the positive effect of the FDI coming in.
And economists are warning this will severely impact our balance of payments.
Yes. The balance of payments is essentially the country's ledger, our trade deficit measured against our capital inflows.
Okay.
Because of this oil shock, SBI economists project our balance of payments could hit negative $28 billion.
Negative $28 billion.
Yeah, and a third straight year in the negative zone means higher borrowing costs for the whole economy.
So what triggered this $126 oil spike today? This shifts us into our third pillar, the global chessboard.
Right. It's a geopolitical flashpoint. An Axios report confirmed that U.S. President Donald Trump is being briefed on potential military strikes against Iran. Iran has retaliated by threatening U.S. warships in the region.
And that threatens the Strait of Hormuz.
Exactly.
For context, the Strait of Hormuz is the narrow waterway connecting the Persian Gulf to the open ocean. But more importantly for you listening, India gets 90% of its LPG and 60% of its liquefied natural gas right through that specific choke point. If a conflict closes that strait, our domestic energy security is paralyzed instantly.
Which perfectly explains a very sudden, aggressive domestic policy move by the government today. They issued an order mandating that any household connected to piped natural gas, or PNG, must immediately surrender their LPG cylinder connections.
It's a forced rationalization. If you have the pipeline in your kitchen, you can't hoard the cylinders. The mechanism is simple forced domestic optimization to reduce our 60% import reliance on global LPG. But changing human behavior is incredibly hard. Out of a massive 33.3 crore domestic LPG consumer base, only about 43,000 consumers have actually surrendered their cylinders since the mandate.
It's a drop in the bucket. And while the government struggled to rationalize energy at home, they're also tightening the mechanisms for how we build physical infrastructure. The Ministry of Road Transport and Highways just drastically altered the bidding norms for hybrid annuity mode, or HAM highway projects.
Okay, let's explain what HAM actually is, because the penalty makes no sense without it. Under a hybrid annuity mode, the government pays the private developer 40% of the project cost upfront during construction, and the developer funds the remaining 60%, right?
Correct. It mitigates the financial risk for the developer. But now, Morth has introduced a penalty of minus 30 marks in the technical evaluation for any contractor involved in a catastrophic failure, like a bridge collapse in the past 2 years.
And because of how the bidding mechanism works, a minus 30 score effectively blacklists you. You cannot win a bid, meaning you're cut off from that upfront 40% government cash flow. It's not just a slap on the wrist, it's a liquidity death sentence for shoddy contractors.
It forces accountability. And when infrastructure capital is deployed effectively, you get transformative results, like the brand new Jammu-Srinagar Vande Bharat Express.
That is an absolute engineering triumph. It cuts travel time between the two cities to under 5 hours, operating flawlessly in minus 10 degrees Celsius weather.
It's incredible.
But it's not just about passenger comfort. Think of the economic multiplier. You can now transport highly perishable commercial goods, like Kashmiri apples, to the rest of the country in a fraction of the time. It reshapes the regional economy.
But domestic infrastructure is only one part of our strategic posture. Remember the U.S.-Iran tensions and the oil crisis. Add to that the fact that Pakistan just commissioned its first Hangar-class submarine, built and supplied by China.
Right.
The naval dynamics in our immediate neighborhood are militarizing rapidly.
It feels like India is caught in a vice relying heavily on Western tech while facing a militarized Pakistan backed directly by China, which perfectly explains why we're suddenly seeing this aggressive diplomatic pivot. Defense Minister Rajnath Singh just held crucial talks with Italy's Guido Crosetto.
Yeah, and that meeting is significant because Italy's defense giant Leonardo is partnering with the Adani Group to manufacture AW169M helicopters natively in India. We are diversifying our defense supply chains.
And looking east, we have Vietnamese President Lam visiting to celebrate a decade of a comprehensive strategic partnership with a sharp focus on maritime security in the Indo-Pacific.
But national security goes far beyond submarines and helicopters. It extends to the very food we eat.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Remember the hook at the start of our discussion, the 1.5 crore rupees?
Yeah.
We usually think of globalization as money flowing into Indian tech hubs. But right now, the Haryana government is actively facilitating its farmers to lease 1 lakh acres of agricultural land in Tanzania.
It's a stunning geoeconomic maneuver. African soil is incredibly fertile, the climate is highly favorable, and compared to Indian real estate, the land is astonishingly cheap.
We have a specific case today, a farmer named Somvir Gasola, who secured a 99-year lease on 65 acres in Tanzania for just 1.5 crore rupees total. To put that in perspective, a single acre of agricultural land in Haryana can easily cost 1 crore rupees.
It's crazy. The mechanism here is what we might call agricultural outsourcing. India faces severe water stress and shrinking land holdings. By exporting Indian capital, high-yield seeds, and mechanized farming expertise to Tanzania, we are securing global food supply chains that ultimately benefit our markets, while also creating new export avenues for Indian agricultural machinery.
It is a brilliant adaptation to domestic resource scarcity. And speaking of resources, that brings us to our fourth and final tiller, future frontiers, specifically climate and cybersecurity. Because the climate reality is shifting fast.
It is. The IMD is forecasting a below-normal monsoon this year, driven by the El Niño Southern Oscillation, or ENSO effect.
And this isn't just an agricultural problem, right? It's a systemic water crisis. A new book released today argues that India desperately needs a circular water economy. Currently, India treats and reuses a mere 3% of its wastewater.
3% is basically nothing.
Nothing.
Exactly. The authors are pushing for a mission mode target to reuse 50% of our treated water by 2028. For context, nations with high water stress like Singapore already meet over 40% of their water demand through advanced recycling.
We really need to catch up. And it's not just water, it's the heat. Early heat waves are ravaging north and central India.
Right. And the editorial consensus today is very critical of how we handle this. Issuing reactive advisories like telling construction workers to shift their hours to the early morning is a band-aid. It's not a solution.
No, it's not.
True disaster management requires infrastructural adaptation. We need to physically heat-proof our cities, dramatically expand urban green cover, and redesign workspaces for the climate reality we're actually living in.
Now, a quick note for our listeners. If you are looking for the requested update on the tiger carrying capacity in Madhya Pradesh, we actually didn't find that in today's verified source materials. And since our rule is to only synthesize the facts directly in front of us, we're going to bypass that and dive straight into the cyber realm, because it's not just the climate heating up, it's our digital infrastructure too.
Absolutely. The Indian Computer Emergency Response Team, CERT-IN, just released a stark advisory regarding the vulnerabilities embedded in advanced artificial intelligence systems.
Yeah.
And the private sector data corroborates the threat. CrowdStrike is reporting an 89% year-over-year spike in AI-enabled cyber attacks.
It's a total paradigm shift. Think of a traditional cyber attack like a burglar trying different keys in a lock to see what fits. It takes time. AI is like a liquid metal that instantly seeps into every microscopic crack in a network's architecture simultaneously. It finds vulnerabilities at speeds human analysts simply cannot match.
To counter that, the Finance Ministry is pushing all Indian banks to adopt the Reserve Bank of India's new Mule Hunter AI. It's an artificial intelligence model designed to act as an immune system, proactively scanning millions of transactions to identify behavioral anomalies and catch financial mule accounts before the funds are siphoned off.
But wait, there is a story buried in today's updates that completely stopped me in my tracks. It takes the threat of AI and cyber warfare and moves it directly into the human body.
You're talking about Charles Lieber.
Yes.
His trajectory is alarming. Lieber is a former Harvard scientist, a pioneer in nanotechnology, who was convicted in the U.S. back in 2021 for concealing funding he received from China. Fast forward to 2025, he is relocated to Shenzhen, China.
And he didn't move there to quietly retire. He has been appointed to lead the iBrain lab. His stated public objective is to develop technology that directly embeds electronics into the human brain.
What's fascinating here is, well, we have to view this through a strategic lens. Brain-computer interfaces are not a fringe science experiment anymore. They are heavily funded, stated national priority for the Chinese government. It is the absolute pinnacle of military-civil fusion.
I marvel at the science fiction of it, but I absolutely shudder at the reality. I mean, we've spent this entire deep dive talking about the struggle for resources, oil in the Strait of Hormuz, water in India, fertile land in Tanzania. But the tech arms race has officially moved past microchips and submarines. They are actively attempting to colonize the human mind itself.
When you erase the biological line between the human brain and a digital network, the implications for surveillance, security, and the very concept of human autonomy are profound. It changes what it means to be a citizen.
Okay, let's take a breath. We have covered a massive amount of terrain today. For you listening, we've journeyed from the Supreme Court defining a 15-year-old's bodily autonomy against medical institutions to Ambedkar laying the groundwork for modern labor rights. We've seen how a spike in crude oil can simultaneously tank the rupee and force changes to the LPG cylinders in your kitchen.
Yeah, all connected.
And we've watched Indian farmers execute brilliant geoagriculture in Tanzania right alongside the terrifying new frontiers of AI cyber warfare.
We've aimed to show you the mechanisms beneath the headlines, how a -30 penalty reshapes highway construction, and how an EEG test could rebuild trust in organ donation.
And that is the true value of being well-informed, seeing the invisible threads connecting these events. But we want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over on your own. We began today by discussing the Citizenship Amendment rules, how the state defines our identity, and how the courts protect our bodily autonomy. But looking at Charles Lieber's work in Shenzhen, literally merging the biological brain with digital electronics, how will our future constitution or any global legal framework define concepts like human rights, sovereignty, or even individual agency when a citizen's mind is directly, permanently wired into the internet?
It is a question that challenges the foundation of every law and right we have discussed today.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the mechanisms of the world around you, keep looking for those hidden connections, and we'll see you next time.